House Democrats have made a lot of news this week, hammering the president's immigration policy, delaying the Robert Mueller hearings, and breaking into open warfare inside their own party. Joining us exclusively here in Washington, Assistant House Speaker Ben Ray Lujan, who is the highest-ranking Hispanic in Congress. And Congressman, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good to be with you again.
Well, you just heard Kellyanne Conway say that these raids that have now started, the ICE raids, doesn't like to call them raids, are a normal enforcement effort. They're for people who entered this country illegally and have been ordered by an administrative process to leave the country. They've gotten a deportation order. They've had their day in court. As she points out, President Obama did it. Why can't President Trump?
Well, Chris, just as the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and members of the Democratic membership have been saying all along, is we would just want the president to simply use his time to go after criminals and felons, not children and families. And that's the concern that many of us have. Many American-born children are terrified that they may come home from church today, or if they go to school tomorrow, that they come home from school and their parents are gone.
But in fairness, their parents did come illegally and have gone through a process, and they've received a final deportation order.
But again, the president should be using his time to go after the criminals and the felons as opposed to the children and the families. And that's what we are talking about here. I'm terrified as to the fear that the president is instilling in families, the impact that this is going to have on small businesses across America, people who only decision may have been to come to the country in the way that they did, but are working in restaurants as chefs. They're teaching our kids in schools. They're serving in our military, defending the United States of America. I think that the president should concentrate his time on the criminals, not on those families.
I want to switch to a related subject. Democrats celebrated when President Trump decided he was not going to try to push to have a question on the census about whether or not people are citizens. But here's how the president described your party's opposition to that question.
They probably know the number is far greater, much higher than anyone would have ever believed before. Maybe that's why they fight so hard.
Question: why is it wrong in a national census, a counting of all the people in the country, to ask, are you a citizen or aren't you?
Chris, I believe that the founding fathers envisioned getting an accurate count of everyone that's in America, and there should not be questions being put on this information gathering initiative that's going to discourage people from answering their doors to answer that very question. And the concern that many people have, or most people have, not just Democrats but Republicans, especially coming off the U.S. Supreme Court's decision that gerrymandering is allowed based on partisanship advantage, is President Trump recently even admitted that the reason for him gathering this information was for partisan gerrymandering, but also to cut programs from communities. And so if our Republican colleagues want to cut access to food programs, school programs, housing programs, they should just put their vote up or down on the House floor and the Senate floor, as opposed to trying to hide what they're trying to get done.
Let's talk about the delay in the Robert Mueller hearings, as I discussed with Kellyanne Conway, from this Wednesday, July 17th, to the following Wednesday, July 24th. That will only be 2 days before Congress leaves Washington for 6 weeks for the August recess. Isn't that going to make it pretty darn hard for Democrats to build on anything that Robert Mueller should say? I mean, one of the points here was to try to build momentum, to pursue the president in whatever he did or didn't do. But if you have this big hearing and then you leave 2 days later for a month and a half, what does that accomplish?
Well, while I support the work of Chairman Nadler and the members of the Judiciary Committee, the special counsel and his report are only one part of this. Now, I want to encourage everyone across America to read the report. Make sure you get your eyes with those 438 pages, but also tune in, because the special counsel will be answering questions associated with what's in that report. And I want to make sure the American people tune in. But, Chris, make no mistake, there are many other investigations that are being looked into. The importance of understanding the allegations associated with tax evasion, with money laundering as well, the importance of getting financial documents from Deutsche Bank, or even understanding the president's tax returns, even those that have been made available at the local level in New York even. So, look, there are many areas that have to be looked into. This is one area, and 2 days of important tuning in by the American people people into the questioning that will be taking place.
Tensions inside the House Democratic Caucus went very public this week. Speaker Pelosi dismissed these 4 freshman congresswomen who are the so-called squad this way. All these people have their public whatever. This is Pelosi talking about the squad. All these people had their public whatever and their Twitter world, but they didn't have any following. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez responded to persistent singling out. It got to a point where it was just outright disrespectful, the explicit singling out of newly elected women of color. Is Speaker Pelosi losing control of the Democratic caucus?
Chris, look, I'm always a believer that, well, the answer to that question is no. Second, I've always been a believer that when you have disagreements with your colleagues, you have a conversation with them. You sit down, you talk. I mean, that's what we should be doing.
You didn't have that. I mean, you had Nancy Pelosi dissing the squad. I can't believe this sounds like high school. Dissing the squad in a Maureen Dowd column in the New York Times, and then you had AOC firing back in an interview in the Washington Post. They're not sitting down and talking.
Well, this week the Speaker was very clear that if members have a difference of opinion or they have questions of even the Speaker, that they should take the time to sit down and talk. And that's been my approach all along. I think it's something that I've learned from predecessors and even my colleagues and even Speaker Pelosi. And look, as a person of color, as the highest ranking Hispanic in the Congress, I can tell you that Nancy Pelosi has lifted up my voice to make sure that I've had opportunities and that my voice has been heard as well. And I continue to look towards her leadership for the good of the country.
You talk about doing this quietly, doing it in private as a family. Friday night, your House Democratic Caucus issued a tweet, a public tweet, couldn't have gone more public, going after AOC's chief of staff. I want to put this up. He had attacked, the chief of staff had attacked a Democratic congresswoman for, quote, enabling racism. Here was the tweet from the official Democratic Caucus. Keep her name out of your mouth. So much for in-house talking. Are some members, honestly, are some members of your caucus losing patience with AOC and some of the other freshmen shooting inside the tent?
Well, first, saying those things about Congresswoman Sharice Davids is absolutely wrong. As the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, I got to know Sharice. I actually had a big role to play in that important race where Sharice won and flipped this important district as well. But again, I'm of the approach that you need to sit down and have a conversation and bring people into that room to do that. I think that this week and into next week, you're going to hear more from our Democratic colleagues about the importance of that. But again, the tone of what was included in that specific message to Sharice Davids, a congresswoman from Kansas, was wrong and something I did not support.
I finally want to talk to the president. Surprise, has been tweeting this morning, and I want to put up a tweet because he specifically has been calling out progressive Democratic congresswomen who come originally from countries, his words, whose governments are complete and total catastrophe. And he says this: why don't they go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came, then come back and show us how it is done? Your thoughts about President Trump saying to duly elected members of Congress, go back to your homes?
Chris, that's the first time hearing of that. That's a racist tweet. Telling people to go back where they came from. These are American citizens elected by voters in the United States of America to serve in one of the most distinguished bodies in the U.S. House of Representatives. I think that's wrong. And especially with all that's going on across America, for the president to spend time saying such racist things this morning, it sounds like.
Yes.
Look, the horrendous detention facilities that we have across the country that Vice President Pence brought attention to, that even he said smelled horrendous, that the Inspector General has called out, that the Commissioner on Human Rights from the UN has said that these facilities are in horrendous conditions. The price of insulin, which has increased over 1,000%,
right.
That has negatively impacted people. That's what the president should have his attention on, not picking these fights and especially sending out racist tweets.
Congressman Lujan, thank you. Thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. Please come back, sir.
I look forward to it, sir.
Immigration and Customs Enforcement preparing to begin nationwide raids tomorrow in at least 10 U.S. cities, part of an effort to arrest thousands of undocumented people with outstanding deportation orders. Christina Coleman is live in Los Angeles with more. Christina.
Arthel, this reinvigorated effort comes just 3 weeks after President Trump delayed the mass deportation sweep, hoping Congress could reach a bipartisan deal on immigration reform. Now this big effort is back on, and so is the outrage across the country. Immigration activists upset and concerned. Mass demonstrations underway in Chicago, where protesters are calling for the abolition of ICE and the closure of detention centers. Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot on Wednesday announced the city was permanently barring its police department from sharing databases with immigration officials. In Aurora, Colorado yesterday, hundreds of protesters demonstrated outside a detention facility. Some of them even pulled down the American flag that flew in front of the building and raised the flag of Mexico in its place. Local media also reporting protesters spray painted "Abolish ICE" messages on a Blue Lives Matter flag that also flew outside of the facility. This ahead of planned raids in Denver. And people also protested at a detention center here in downtown L.A. Demonstrators calling for the undocumented migrants inside to be released and the facilities to be shut down. They say the planned ICE raids are designed to cause fear in the immigrant community.
Individuals are in fear, and it's real. Trauma is part of what is going on. I hate to say that. I don't even want to say that it's the new now.
But supporters of the Trump administration say the planned raids are necessary and will be carried out carefully.
The professional men and women of ICE will methodically plan these operations to target the people that they know have been ordered by a judge to be removed. They'll methodically go through and find these targets and do it in the safest way possible. And our heart goes out to them. We want them to be safe while they conduct these operations. It's an important thing to do.
Some authorities in so-called sanctuary cities continue to deny cooperation to federal authorities. And as for here in California, our Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom tweeting a video this week reminding immigrant communities of their rights.